My name is Melinda Vaughn, and together with my husband, Clark, we co-founded For His Children. I wanted to welcome you all and thank you for the love, the energy, and the caring that you are bringing to the ministry. It is what it is because of God's power and His love and His blessing, and He does that by way of all of you. In the 1980s, my husband and I were living in Northern California, Mammoth Lakes, and we were invited to go on a mission team trip to Ecuador. At first, we thought about it and we thought, no, my husband's way too busy with his law practice. I had several jobs, way too busy. We found ourselves coming up with all these excuses as to why we couldn't go. And then there was this flash, this opening of knowledge or a revelation in me at that very moment. And I remember turning to my husband and saying, you know, we talk a big talk. We say that everything we have comes from the Lord, but do we respond in like manner? And it was that revelation right then and there that made us start seriously considering accepting this invitation to go on a 2-week mission team trip with our church down to Ecuador. In 1988, we took a 2-week mission team trip to Ecuador, and we brought our 2 children with us. Our son was 8 and our daughter was 5. And that was their first experience living overseas for a short period of time. And the second half of our trip, we were in Quito. We were at a church service one night, and my husband said he felt this warmth come over him and just this incredible love and opening of his heart toward the Ecuadorian people. And he perceived a voice in his head saying to him, "You will come back here." A moment later, he turned to me and he asked if I had a pencil and paper. And after I gave it to him, after a few minutes, I looked over his shoulder and he was writing things like sell the law practice, sell the cars, sell the airplane. My husband had a lot of toys. Schooling for the children, medical insurance. And I instantly, in my heart, it was like the Lord just kind of opened up the bigger picture and said, something's going on here. The thought that God was pulling us out of our lives there in Northern California and was beginning to show us something out there that He had for us was incredibly exciting to me, and I was on board from the beginning. It was a couple years, probably about a year and a half, that we felt things were finally coming together. During that time, we made more mission trips to Guatemala. We were house parents at an orphanage there run by the Verbo Church. And it was during that time that we saw the blessing that was foster care by loving families, also the blessing that was adoption. It was just beautiful to see this, and we knew that whatever we were going to be doing in Ecuador was going to have something to do with adoption, and that we wanted to be a channel, a way of facilitating these children. We wanted to be part of the adoption opportunity. After arriving in Quito in August of 1990, we began looking for connections with people who worked in Child Protective Services. And so it took about a year and a half of regular volunteer work until finally we received a phone call from one of the orphanages, and they asked us if we'd be willing to take in a very young infant, 6 months old, who was severely malnourished, and the doctor would not allow this little girl to go back to the orphanage environment, but he wanted her to go with the foster family so she could get some individualized care. We were elated. We just saw this as the beginning of the ministry. We drove to the government orphanage and met this little girl, and I remember seeing this tiny, tiny head sticking out of this bundle of blankets, and you could see her cheekbones, and she was sunken in here, and her eyes were very large. I had no idea that I was looking at a child with severe malnutrition. It wasn't until we got her home and unwrapped her and got her ready for a bath, that we could see the severity of her malnutrition. We, of course, immediately had set up an appointment with a pediatrician, who then referred us to a neurologist. We were beginning to pour all our love and the energy and the emotions of starting this ministry. We were beginning to pour those into her. But it wasn't meant to be. She became very ill. We didn't know it, but she was developing pneumonia, and she died 3 days later in my husband's arms late one night. And I still can remember that evening calling our pediatrician, taking her up to the emergency room, and it was very traumatic. If this was the start of the ministry, why this? And that was one of the early times that I feel the Lord spoke to me after much prayer and much asking Him for some sort of wisdom, give us some reason why things are going the way they're going. I believe that the words that He impressed on me were, I'm laying a deep foundation for a ministry, and that hurts. I got to dig deep. And He said that's going to be painful at times. And that as startling as it was to hear, nevertheless was comforting, because it gave us hope. It was about 6 months later that we got another phone call from the government orphanage asking us to care for a little baby boy, his young single mother. She had decided that she was unable to care for him. The orphanage was contacted, and they contacted us. So we began pouring our love and our energy and time and attention in on this little boy, Jose Ignacio. And about 3 months later, we got a phone call from the government orphanage telling us that there had been a change in regulations, and that the government was no longer approving foster families to care for children. We had to take this baby, who had become a part of our lives, a part of our family, and return him to the government orphanage. In the following months, I can remember making daily trips to that orphanage. I had this intense desire in me to keep the emotional link with this baby going, that he sense and feel a connection, that he was special, that he was important to somebody, that he wasn't just another little body in a crib among many. Finally, the government reversed its decision, and from that point on, the little boy stayed with us until he was signed in adoption to an adoptive family from Norway. And to this day, we keep in touch with that family. That baby has grown into a beautiful human being, and have been able to visit them in Norway, and it's just been a blessing. Who would have imagined 22, 23 years ago that this would be happening? We've gone through lots of mountains and valleys. Not only were there challenges as far as working with the government, we also had a scare with the media where we were accused of child trafficking. We also had financial issues where we had to close the doors of our children's home for several months because we didn't have the funds to welcome any more children. We had difficulty working with employees of a different culture. In many ways, I can look back and I can say, oh, what a blessing it was to have my husband and me working in the same ministry together, living on site, founders, directors of this ministry. And yet when I look back on the demands that were placed on us, the responsibilities that we had, it's a miracle that we came out. And the Lord was gracious. The Lord was gracious, but lots of lessons learned. Let's fast forward to about 2010. My husband was noticing some unusual physical symptoms when we were living in Ecuador. And after several medical exams, they gave him the diagnosis of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. And that was the beginning of a time of transition for us. We were, in a sense, shocked, and yet the Lord just kind of put us on an automatic track. And we had our board of directors in Ecuador, our board of directors here in the US, friends and supporters came together. Our staff at the children's home in Ecuador rallied and came around us and just began covering and taking over the responsibilities that my husband and I had, and opening the door for us, so that we ended up in about 2011. We decided to move up to the US. We knew that ALS is a terminal disease. There is no cure, and so my husband wanted to be around family. So we moved to the Pensacola area in about 2011, and Clark passed away in 2012. And since that time, I've felt that it was God's will that I stay, that I remain here in the States and not go back to Ecuador. Our board had been talking about the importance of preparing our local leadership on site for leadership transition someday. And this just really seemed to be a turning of a page in the story of Forest Children, in that it was going to be testing the skill, the faith of our local staff and board of directors with me out of country. So with the caring of these two children, the little girl, Sophia, who died after just a few days, and then the care of this little baby, Jose Ignacio, that was the start for his children. And we can look back and see how it grew and evolved and stretched and changed and matured and became more professional, and all the things that we learned over the years. We've had some American couples, American families come down and help us, John and Cindy Snyder, Tom and Heidi Lonsdale. We've grown our board of directors so that they've become a very viable, energetic, supportive entity for the ministry. Our donors have increased in number, and just hundreds and hundreds of people who have, over the past 25 years, become a part of this ministry and helped it be what it is today. As I look back on the history of Forest Children for these last 25 years, I think to myself, you know, God could have used anybody to start this ministry. But He chose us. It's something that my husband and I both felt and do, I feel, very, very thankful. I feel privileged. I feel it has been a huge blessing to have been given the opportunity to help start a community of people, a ministry, an organization that is reaching out to children and families in need. It could possibly be the greatest trauma in a person's life to be separated from their family, from their parents. And with the love that you all help us give to these children, and God's love for these children, we're able to fulfill the mission for His children, which is to provide a loving, quality, warm, bright, clean home environment for these kids while we seek to minister to them and provide for them. And it humbles me. It humbles me. And I daily turn to Him and say, would you bless your ministry today? This is your ministry. So we thank you all so very, very much for being a part, for your donations, for your support in so many ways, and especially for your prayer.